So the first step that we need to take is to create a new Laravel project. There are two ways this can be done. It's either by running Composer command called create project, for which you have to have Composer installed first. If you don't have Composer, then refer to the previous setup section. You can check if you have it by running Composer version inside the terminal. You should see the Composer version. So optionally, you can also install this Laravel installer. For that, you also need Composer. Let's try this. This is optional, so you don't have to do it, but you can run it and see if it works for you. So after you successfully install the Laravel installer, the new app is created using Laravel new, followed by your application folder name. Alternatively, you can fall back to this Composer command. That's actually my preferred way. And this is a generic Composer command to create projects based on different packages. It just happens so that we're gonna base ourselves on the Laravel framework package, and then that's the name of our app or the folder in which we're gonna create the app. We can just copy this fragment, and then we need to come up with the application name. In that case, it's always going to use the most recent Laravel version. As of today, this would be Laravel 11. So let me just call the project task list, as this would be our first project, and I just hit enter. Now you need to be connected to the internet because this would be downloading things over the network. So some of the things happen when we create the project, and I'm gonna now describe what has happened. Now at this point, we might have the first problems. If your setup is incorrect, typically this means you don't have certain extensions enabled in your PHP. That might be that you don't have the SQLite extension, which Laravel is now using by default as a database, or some other extensions that Laravel requires are not enabled. In that case, please refer to the setup section, the article inside that section. There is a fragment there explaining which extensions Laravel requires and then how to enable them on all the possible systems. So you should actually do it right now and jump to that article for troubleshooting, because this just means your PHP is set up incorrectly. Now, if everything went fine on your side and you see more or less what I see, let's quickly explain what has happened. So by running this create project command, we've created a new PHP project based on Laravel framework on this specific package. So the Laravel package itself also requires some additional packages, additional libraries, and they are also installed in the versions that this version of Laravel requires. Another thing that has happened was that the .env file was created. That's a kind of file that contains all the basic settings of your application. We're gonna be changing and seeing this file later on. For now, you just need to know that inside your directory, you should have a .env file. It's important because without it, Laravel cannot function. So next up, Laravel is trying to resolve, or Composer specifically, what versions should it download of all the specific libraries that it requires to function, and it's doing that. It's figuring out the versions, and then it's trying to download them over the network. So as you see, there's lots of those different libraries, and after Laravel is done with it, or specifically Composer is done installing all those libraries, is also suggesting some other libraries and packages that might be useful. Then an application key is generated. It's essential, we need to have for security reasons a key that is generated for our app, and then the SQLite database file. So, as I've said previously, since the version 11, Laravel by default is using an SQLite database. So that's a different kind of database from the most often database used with PHP, which is MySQL or MySQL, depending how you like to spell that. And the SQLite database is inside one single file. It's located inside your root directory of the project, database folder, database.sqlite file. Now, using SQLite for development purposes or while we are still learning is totally fine. It would feel almost like using the MySQL database, but if you prefer to run a MySQL database, then you should either use the one with XAMPP, or if you prefer that, you can also set up a Docker MySQL database, but not at this point. This would be explained later. When we're gonna need the database, I'm gonna explain exactly step by step how to run MySQL database. For now, we can leave it as it is. And what's happening next is after the database is created, the SQLite database file in this case, Laravel is trying to do migrations. Now we're gonna talk about migrations in detail much later, or well, in this section, but a little bit later. It's just adding some necessary tables, some base tables that Laravel is using by default, and this is what running migrations means. Anyway, at this point, you should be ready to work on the project. If you had any issues, then please refer to this article I've already mentioned, because typically this means that something's incorrect with your setup, and there are some typical problems people are having, so please don't ask a question unless you first jump to the article that is inside the setting up section, where I also list the typical problems and how to solve them. Obviously, if you had any issues. Now, let's start the code editor and let's take a quick look at the project. Alright, so at this point you should be ready to open the project inside the code editor, and this is what I'm gonna do next in the next video, where I'm gonna explain some basic files and folders that we can find inside the project. Remember that if you had any issues at this point, jump back to this troubleshooting article or just ask a question if you can't find help there. Now let's jump to the code editor. See you inside the next video.